Hello, hello. My name is Kathleen Randall, and welcome again to the Go-to-Market Lab, which is a podcast where founders learn the art of scaling their go-to-market strategy through different pivots and stages of a SaaS software business, specifically those who are starting up. Let's hit it. So this is Kathleen Randall's top 10 list of killer go-to-market strategies tips for SaaS startup founders, specifically enterprise B2B software founders, to start to get focused on for 2025. So, number one, what I'm going to start off with is the idea about finding your man. So, before you get on the phone or before you start giving me feedback saying that, why are you saying a man and not a woman? So, I just finished reading. Actually, I did Audible very specifically because Matthew McConaughey is a great storyteller. But if you've listened or read his book, Greenlight, when he gets in a character, he spends all this time in thinking about the man, the person that he's going to be playing. And he spends a lot of time in really getting into that mindset and thinking through exactly what this person would feel, what they would think, what they would say in different moments. And just fun fact, if you don't know the story, his famous "all right, all right, all right" came from an ad lib from a scene that he had cut with the director that allowed him to ad lib at the time. And he wasn't even a proclaimed actor at that point. He was trying to be a director. And so, and that was because he had really visualized his man, quote unquote, as being his brother Pat and really being in the moment and thinking about what would this person say at this moment. So with that story, that is what I'm going to encourage you. Kind of tip number one is find your man, which is what I'll say in go-to-market world is your ideal customer profile. To quote Emily Shipman from the second episode we did here, an ICP is not a market. It's not a generic person, is an actual face that you can think about, that you can empathize with, that you can sit in their shoes. And until you really have internalized that ideal customer profile as somebody who has a face, a name, a personality, you're likely not going to be able to really put together the right messaging, the right product packaging, the right sales strategy and communication strategy with your customers. So that's the first bit is make sure that you're crystal clear on who, quote unquote, your man is or the ideal customer profile is. Okay, tip number two, align your sales team with the ICP. I'm going to defend my fellow salespeople on this call and say it is an awful feeling when you are the sales team. You have spent time with your ICPs, with your customers and your prospects. You know what they want, what they don't like, because you get punched in the face when they don't like something, and you get a high five or a deal close whenever they do like something. And when a new product comes out, which is maybe a pivot, and it is changing your ICP or who you want to talk to. At its minimum, remember, go-to-market is the trifecta, I like to say, between product, between marketing, and between sales. And so just make sure that sales is a part of the discussion if you're looking to augment and change your ICP, which you might have a few versions of in those early days as you start to think about who you're going to focus on first, second, third. Just make sure sales is part of that conversation and buys in. At a minimum, they'll give you great points to consider and think about so that even if you don't change your archetype or your strategy, having their input will certainly make it better, no doubt. All right. Tip number three, ditch your cold calling script. Ditch your script. Ditch the predefined, I'm going to memorize the sales pitch from the beginning. Why? Because it's not authentic and it does not come across as anything that somebody should ever listen to. But ultimately, I would always tell my team, it doesn't really matter what you're selling, but if you aren't selling something that you don't believe in, no one's going to want to buy the thing. My last boss, David Lemon, always would say to us that sales is the transfer of energy, but ultimately it's not. I say 50% of the communication strategy is not what you say, but it's how you say it. I have probably not hired a couple of people, I will readily admit, in my life for sales engineering roles that will, and Suzanne Grauer, I know, who is my third guest in episode number 3, will back me up on this. And that if the presentation is such that I just can't feel it and I start kind of zoning out and not feeling the energy, it's not really probably going to be a great fit for somebody presenting the product, and largely for probably 30, 40, maybe for larger conversations, larger demo meetings, longer than that. So you really have to be a person who's engaged at the end of the day, to me, being engaged and passionate is the outcome of really believing into what you are selling. So just make sure that you understand the why of what you're selling, even if it's not something that is the best thing that has happened to you. Because that's, again, that may not be something you personally experience. Your ability to empathize and understand why this product is so valuable in the market, why your customers might have it, and really internalize that is I would say 90% of the game at the end of the day. Tip number 4, hunt for a happy customer, not a future pain in the ass customer, pain in the backside customer. Sorry for using little French terms there. So what do I mean by that? So as we said in an earlier podcast, one happy customer is better than 100 okay customers. Why is that? Your first set of customers, you really want to be a few things. Number one, set up to be customer advocates for you. Why would that, how could that benefit you? Of course, they would bring you reference customers and bring you other leads because they'll talk passionately about your product. But more importantly, if they're aligned to your vision, aligned with what you're trying to achieve, they're going to be worth their weight in gold for whatever they're paying you for their contract in feedback. So learn from them, identify them, and just know in those beginning days, I know it's very, very, very tempting just to take the money that's on the table. But if you're starting to feel like this customer is not really aligned and they're going to pull your product into a direction in the early days that is not aligned with what your vision and your calling for your company is, be very, very wary about that. There are certain Fortune companies out there, I won't say their names, but they will write a check, but they also might capsize your business because you'll spend 80% of your time just producing code for that client. So that's a no bueno in the early days. All right. Tip number 5, warm introductions are golden. So I don't have to tell most of you that on the phone. You all realize that whether you're a salesperson or not. But I think one thing that has occurred to me is that there's a lot of people I think that aren't maybe as comfortable with reaching out to connections of their own, let alone those of their fellow employees, of their board members, of their executive founding committee too as well. So one thing that I highly recommend in terms of getting warm introductions is really to make a list. When you've communicated to your company and to your board members who your ICP is, set up quick 20-minute calls with them, ask them to pull up their LinkedIn and say, hey, let's kind of go down the list. Who do you have as a first or second connection that meets this? And make a list of those. If you can find 50 people, 100 people on that list, that's at least a good place to start having, warm introductions and friendly conversations. Certainly do it in a way that makes sense to the contact and honor the relationship. But I would say, what you really want to create at those first days is set yourself up to get those warm introductions. And so what that means is when you find your list, ideally kind of 500 contacts or so that really know you or your board member or somebody who's invested in your company and your co-founders and are invested in your success, create a mailing list. Reach out to them, send out a mailer every once a month and just say, hey, here's what we've achieved in our startup over the last 30 days. Here are some great insights that we found in the market in our conversations, and just make it easy for them to refer you. With that introduction of that newsletter, you could do personalized emails and say, hey, listen, John, just want to forward your newsletter. I was thinking about you because I know you work a lot with fill in the blank with some of your key customers who are hospital system CISOs. And there's just a few nuggets that I've highlighted in yellow in the newsletter below that might be interesting for you to share with them. So those would be, again, find ways not just to be like, hey, can you refer me to this person, but find ways to really utilize that friends and families list to create introductions in the future and to create a funnel for you. Right. Tip number 6, demonstrate that you actually have a deep business understanding. Salespeople, marketing folks on the line of who you're selling to. Please don't be reliant on just your product team or your executive team who is very close to the persona that you've been selling to as the only subject matter experts. The more that you can understand your customer and understand a day in the life, understand your technology, even if it's a highly technical product, the better you're going to be in being able to be nimble and to take those initial pitches and be able to call audibles on them, be able to react to conversations that you're having, discussions that you're having with your prospects on the line, because you ultimately are going to showcase that you know this information in that domain and you're really not a salesperson, that you're a subject matter expert. So just make sure you're taking the time to really understand the product and not just the shiny elevator pitch that and a few one-liners that you need to know just to get through the first calls before you flip over, which you kind of think in the back of your head. As soon as I get this customer on a call, we will flip them over to a sales engineer or even the founder to do that meeting, to be the brains of the operation. Take that ownership yourself. Okay. For my marketing friends, so tip number 7, crystal clear website messaging. Sometimes this is really hard to do because you end up being very close to the fire. It's very hard to QA your own work, right? Especially when you have been working on something for hours and hours and hours. So find a third party, find a friend, find a confidant, find a mentor to really make sure that at your website, on that homepage within a few minutes, and then if you really kind of crawl through the website, through the whole website within 5 minutes, you very much clearly understand the problem, the solution, and who you're talking to in your website. Justin Dorfman talks about in HIP's episode that most companies want to keep it high level. They want to keep it the forward elevator pitch, have lots of glossies on the screen. But the challenge is that I would say is look at the competitors or the alternatives in your space, alternative and competitive companies. Look at their websites. If they're saying generally the same thing as you and you're realizing you're all saying the same buzzwords, it's really hard as the executive buyer to figure out what you're actually doing that's A, different, and B, something, and you're trying to figure out what is this can actually do for my organization and how are we going to use it. So just make sure that, you want to keep it crystal clear and simple, but don't keep it so high level or so vague that your clients or potential prospects and customers are looking at the website, and after maybe 30 minutes or an hour of staring at the website, they really don't understand not only what you do, but what value it brings to them. All right, tip number 8. Evolve your marketing assets along the way, along your growth journey. What does this mean? It means that marketing assets are really important. They're important for people at different stages of the sales journey. They're important for social proof. They're important for people that you're working with, prospects that might be your champions or coaches, to be able to share and enable them, to empower them to sell internally. But just know that if those sales assets, if you're just doing it to have a landing page or to have a pitch deck, and if they're not assets that you could potentially kind of customize, cater to, tweak for those early stages, because you're going to have to play with messaging quite a bit, just make sure that it's in the template that you can do that with. Again, shameless plug for Justin Dorfman and his company Asset Mule. They make this really easy. But whatever the case is, just think about, as you're creating those initial assets, that you need to have some flexibility and some scalability in order to make those assets, to be quite frank, usable by the sales team and effective, and some sort of effective outcome coming from them. All right, tip 9. Embrace a feedback loop. Don't talk to an echo chamber. There's a point, I just mentioned that you're close to the fire, that you just start to either talk to 2 types of people. One, who your friends, family, colleagues, who usually won't tell you anything bad or quote unquote constructive. And then when they do it so subtle, there's so many attaboys that you hold on to the attaboys and to the compliments. Or you just kind of keep talking the same people and that, that also have the same ideas as you. If you are, recently I took on an awesome company, an awesome startup that has a huge potential as a category creator product. It's incredible, but they're in the engineering space. Now, I don't have an engineering background, but it's been quite a nice journey to go on with them, because for them, I've been able to be their fresh set of eyes and ears as a non-engineer coming to them to help with go-to-market that isn't in their echo chamber, as they like to say, that isn't in kind of in the weeds, close to the fire, and doesn't come from an engineering background. And so it's always nice to have a diverse team with that type of balance. So just make sure you are getting out of the building and you are starting to really expose yourself to companies, to people to give you feedback, or not necessarily just your cheerleaders, but also your naysayers. Okay, tip number 10, last tip for the day. We spend a lot of time in product really thinking about that perfect MVP or minimum viable product. And ultimately in those early days, I'm a big fan of, if you've read Google Ventures' lean innovation strategy, of their hypothesis testing, and which Hazel calls on his episode, Riskiest Assumption Testing, or RAT. I'll give a story. So an example of this might be the Zappos founder. Before he actually did lay down any line of code to create the website, his most risky assumption was the assumption hypotheses that people would buy shoes without physically trying them on. And so instead of creating a website, he went door to door with an order sheet from his shoe store and went to people's doors, showed them the order sheet and the pictures, and got their sizes. If they had exchanges, he would go run them back and forth. But ultimately, he needed to see, are people going to be comfortable and build trust in this ability to buy shoes without actually physically trying them on? And is that a viable way to be able to sell shoes? So that was his most make or break assumption to test. So I would say in those early days, really make sure that you are identifying for your ideal customer profile what are going to be the make or break things that will, as much as they might love the product, might squash the deal. Those are also assumptions you need to test. But also, again, those assumptions that your whole philosophy kind of is built on as it relates to your messaging and your packaging. So make sure to get those out in the open very early on with the caveats. And you can read Pattern Breakers, great book I think it just released earlier this year about the category changers and quote unquote, why some startups change the future. It's written by Mike Maples Jr. Now, that's not going to happen if you have a category creation product, right? Because we're not going to be unfamiliar with your product as a whole. So it's not really about pitching the whole product as a kind of holistic endeavor, so to speak, as your assumptions, but really just testing the key assumption, which is, are people open to, for example, the Airbnb story? If people can read reviews, are people open to actually staying at somebody's house? Maybe in the early days, that wasn't a lot of people. It was only a very small group of digital natives. But if those are assumptions that is built on everything you do in those early days really needs to be surrounding what are the roadblocks, what are the obstacles that will make that assumption not be true. So in their case, they realized in order for Airbnbs, in order for people to want to stay somewhere, they need to develop trust. And so their key insight, as Pattern Breakers likes to call it, their key insight that was unique to the market was actually testing that assumption that people would gain this trust based upon being able to see other people's reviews. So that's all I got for you today. That's my brain dump for you, at least for today's date that I'm recording this as November 11, 2024. So thank you again for joining us on another episode of Go to Market Lab. I really hope today's presentation, today's podcast has provided you with actionable insights, not just pie in the sky insights, but actionable insights that will help you master, conquer, execute flawlessly your go-to-market strategy, and ultimately get to the goal of accelerating your business growth. Now, let me just remind you, if you like today's episode, please be sure and subscribe. If you're super nice, you can leave a review with comments, questions, additional feedback. If you are a little gun shy, feel free to message me directly on LinkedIn. You can find my profile pretty easily, Kathleen Randall. Your feedback really helps me understand which content is valuable, not valuable, and what you might be looking for future industry experts, founders, VCs, and other guests who will be joining the show in the future to add to our giant list of strategic tips that we're building in this Go-to-Market Lab podcast library for ways that you can elevate the growth of your startup business. So with that being said, please stay connected with me on LinkedIn so that you can see postings for more resources that are coming up in new episodes. Together, we can navigate the complexities of this very tumultuous market, unlock your startup's potential, and reach your growth goals faster. Thank you for listening today. I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks. Bye-bye.